Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. With your hosts, Lonnie Lowery.
Remember, Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree held together with scar tissue and bone spurs.
Rob Fortney.
And I'm telling you, the pain that I would suffer was beyond excruciating.
And Phil Stevens.
Do it, Rob. You'll kill all those nerves.
Thanks for listening.
Welcome, Iron Radio listeners. This is Lonnie Lowery. I am an exercise physiologist, and I'm a licensed nutritionist, and I'm a former competitive bodybuilder.
Yeah, this is Phil Stevens. I run Strength Yield. I'm a powerlifter. I've dabbled in Highland Games, a bunch of other stuff. So I've got to meet here in a few weeks out on the West Coast.
Nice. This is Dr. Mike Nelson. I'm a faculty member at the Carrig Institute, creator of the Flex Diet certification, and I'm in Anaheim, California here, getting ready to present for the NSCA Personal Trainers Conference in a couple hours.
Cool.
Yeah.
John Mike's out there too, right?
Yeah, he's out here too. We saw him last night, and we had two dinners last night. We had the speaker dinner, and we were still hungry, so we walked across the street and had more protein at Morton's Steakhouse.
That's funny. Did they underfeed you, or are you just too big to be satisfied?
They had this bacon that they were raving about, so I'm like, well, I'll go over and get the side of bacon, and it was like super. Well, it was like they called it a bacon steak, so it's like Newski bacon that's with like glaze and maple syrup and all sorts of craziness.
Awesome.
It was good.
All right, I'll tell you what. Before I get to 4 listener mails that are sort of interwoven with some science, Phil, you're going to compete. Let's get an update from you. Like, what's happening with you? What are you thinking? How are you feeling? That kind of stuff.
Strength and muscle sport news.
Well, I feel good. I feel good. We are I got to hit openers this weekend and next weekend, and that's it. So, no, everything's feeling good. So we'll see. I'll go in there today and hit openers. I'm thinking about raising my opener.
That's good.
I had a long night last night, so we'll see how it goes. My plan for this meet is to come out whole, so don't break anything. But I'm feeling good. So. The only thing I could find, I was searching the internet for biggest squats by someone with a hip replacement in a meet. And the only thing I could find was Ed Cohn. So Ed did 660. So my plan is to beat that with my second attempt.
Oh, nice.
And then I want 700. So if I can squat 700 on a fake hip, I'd be totally stoked.
Wow.
Yeah. It's like a new category.
World record or anything, but
No, that's cool.
Who knows? The hip replacement world record, I have no clue. They don't, like somebody was asking me, I was like, they don't track that.
Yeah. The old guys with the fake hips.
Yeah, the old guy with fake hip record.
Still.
I can just picture all the orthos listening just losing their mind.
Cringing. Yeah.
So
breaking new ground.
Yeah, I think I can get it. The goal is a 700 squat and 700 deadlift. So,
that's big.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
We need to play that up. Like, if you do squat more than Ed, we need to get some, I don't know, publicity value out of that. Like Phil Stevens in a, ongoing battle, battle of the old guys with Ed Cohn himself.
Well, funny thing is, I think he might be the head judge. So, that's me. So,
that's funny.
In Ed's defense, he did it really easily. So, it looked like he was toying. But,
okay.
So it wasn't hard.
Okay. Well, yeah. And you know what, too? This would be sad, except these are numbers that are better than most people with real hips could do.
Oh, yeah. So, better than me.
So, that's what makes it so fun, right? Because it's actually better than like 99% of the people could do anyway. Anyway, it's funny. Okay. 4 bits of mail today, and then our topic is going to be breaking into fitness and nutrition writing. We'll try to get some answers from the hosts and from, we have a guest on, Dr. Cordaro, who is actually a writing professor. So we're all in the fitness and nutrition worlds, but, we're not English professors. So I thought, let's go to the source and get something juicy. So in any case, let's start with these mails. This first one is from Aaron. He says, hey guys, thanks so much on that information. He had asked us about some neurological things. I couldn't spell any of it, but I'm trying to put it to good use in doing some of my own research. I'm wondering if I throw together a presentation for a case study that maybe Dr. James Andrews may take an interest in along with some other formidable neurologists. Is there any way you could send me the link or article that you guys were talking about regarding neuronal injuries? And any word back from those physical therapists? Thanks so much. A donation is on the way. God bless. So, thanks, Aaron. Yes, actually, I did just hear from the physical therapist that I'd asked about Erb's palsy. Here's what she said. She seems to be focusing on that this is a pediatric condition. I did send your numbers, right? And if anybody didn't listen when we were discussing this on air, Aaron has some good numbers. I mean, really, solid powerlifting numbers in like the, 300-ish, 400 plus range. And so clearly he's not 12 years old. But here's what the PT Cheryl said. Hi, Lonnie. In pediatrics, the emphasis is still strength training. Again, we're talking about brachial plexus problems. We use kid-friendly pediatric cuff weights, matched resistance TheraBand, and manual resistance. I've done hands-on to guide relearning or learning of movement patterns. I've always used proprioception with kids. That helps my input emphasize and guide their output in learning. If the kids can tolerate it, I use e-stim as an adjunct therapy. External rotation is the hardest motion to get back with Erb's palsy. It's been 3 years since I've been in the clinic, though. It's possible there are some neuro advances that I'm not aware of. I hope this helps, Cheryl. So that's all I've got, Aaron. That's what she said. And like I said, she seems to be really focusing on the pediatric nature of this. So hopefully that offers some further insight. Okay, next. Karen sent us something. Karen's a longtime listener. I always appreciate when she sends stuff because she really understands. She knows where to go get peer-reviewed science. It really, her emails are mostly like, so what is your take on this, right? So it's more like a conversation than something tutorial. But she says, I've lately been interested in joint pain supplements and associated research. Here's a couple interesting ones I found recently that I haven't heard you guys talk about. So I'm just going to jump to the bottom here. The one I'm most interested in lately is the one with, of course, the least amount of write-up, which is stinging nettle. Urtica dioica or dioica? I don't even know how to pronounce that. I thought, Mike, maybe you had some input. But she says, a lot of research on it is from small, offbeat, questionable journals, however, and mostly they focus on supposed prostate/allergy benefits. However, I've been drinking the tea lately, and I've noticed a marked difference in my joint pain. Also, the tea has a pleasant, mild green hay taste, so I recommend it if you ever get a chance to try it out. Karen. What do you know, Mike? Anything about stinging nettle?
Not too much on that for joint stuff. I mean, there's some stuff that it, in theory may help with testosterone, but I've not been overly impressed with that data, possibly, and there's not much data on that. But no, I haven't heard of too much on joint stuff. But maybe it's somehow modifying inflammation or something like that.
No, yeah, that's correct.
Sounds like it's working. So yeah,
she did send. Here's a paper: cytokine secretion in whole blood of healthy subjects following oral administration of Urtica dioica. Dioica.
Yeah.
It's so hard to figure that one out. Here's what she sent. 20 healthy volunteers ingested it for 21 days, 2 capsules twice a day. Again, nettle leaf extract. They looked at interleukin-1 beta and IL-6. So you're correct, sir, in inflammation. After 7 and 21 days ingestion. Now, this is where it's just a little odd. It's ex vivo. So they take some... They take a blood sample, for example, they stimulate it with LPS or something, and then they look at how hyperreactive it is. And it did, decrease tumor necrosis factor alpha, 14 to 24%. It decreased IL-1 beta, 19 to 39%. So it did look like it was reducing inflammatory cytokines. But again, the conclusion in this journal, and this is a German journal, so it's Teucher et al., Teucher. All right, here it goes. I don't know if you guys know German. Arzneimittelforschung is the title of the journal. So, anyway, even they said there seems to be some suggestions, but also there may be different bioavailabilities and some other issues with it. So, you know what? My joints are pretty shot these days, so hey, I'm up for it. I'll give it a shot, Karen, and then I'll let you know. So stinging nettle for joints, perhaps.
Yeah, the two things I've used that seem to help the most are one of them is collagen, but a study done by Keith Barr's lab. He's out in California here, and it gave subjects actually gelatin and a small amount of vitamin C, and then they looked to see where all those amino acids went, right? Because if you go back in the day, like collagen used to be considered a not so good protein because it doesn't really spike muscle protein synthesis that much. It used to be a filler in bars for mouthfeel and all kinds of stuff.
Oh, it still is, actually, yeah.
Yeah, it still is. But now, bone broth is real popular and all that kind of stuff. But what they showed was that you had to take it about 40 to 60 minutes before some type of loading or exercise to have an effect. If you took it after, it didn't seem to have an effect on the soft tissue. So that may be one method. And then another one I've used is a couple other ones I've used. I know our buddy Sean Casey has one that I've used that's been pretty good. And then another one called Actistatin. It originally came out as an equine supplement for horse racing. And what's interesting about that is that those people don't care much about money per se, and they time everything. And horses are less likely to have a placebo effect because they don't really know what they're eating or not eating. So I've used that one a fair amount in the past, and that seems to help too.
No, that makes sense to me. The workout as a stimulant, right? Because of if you think about like cartilage in your joints, because it's not highly vascularized, you'd have to get a little bit of like pressure or differentials and kind of mush it around. Maybe get the fluids flowing in there. Deposit the amino acids or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's one of the coolest studies I think I've seen this past year, and because there was some data before that in animal models, but that was the first human model to show that maybe in theory we can then speed up all that soft tissue turnover, right? Because muscle's about 90-day turnover. So if you look at your right bicep, that'll be all kind of replaced in about 90 days, but soft tissue is closer to about 9 months. So I think anything you can do to speed up that may help too. And granted, joint pain could be from a whole host of stuff, but a lot of people tend to have more soft tissue injuries also.
Right on. Yep. Okay, the next two, we have two, and they're sort of lengthy. They're both from different guys named Neil. So Neil number one, and you know who you are. Good morning. I figured it out, and I got my donation in despite your email. I'm quite stubborn. And just to follow up, I told him, he mentioned that he was a student, and I said, listen, if you're a broke student, we don't send us money. But anyway, he did anyway. He's stand-up guy. So anyway, he says, let's see, don't worry about it. I'm not an average student. I'm a 30-year-old law student. Anyway, so he finished his undergrad years ago and that sort of thing. So anyway, let's see. I had a show idea that I don't think has been done yet, natural insulin sensitivity and insulin production. I've read a lot about fasting, cinnamon, alpha-lipoic acid, chromium, etc. I think it'd be interesting to hear you guys talk about it. Just an idea. It might take a lot of prep work. Well, I can preface this right off the bat by saying, a lot of this stuff has been trends in the industry, and this doesn't mean we won't address this, but almost any phytochemical has some evidence that it helps with glucose metabolism. It's almost ridiculous, and cinnamon has some. It sure does. In fact, there are certain cinnamon-related phytochemicals in coffee itself. But as far as like alpha-lipoic acid, chromium, I mean, you could add vanadium to this list, magnesium. There's a lot of minerals, and you have to be careful because some of them, they look like they work in diabetics. and I'm drawing on some longer-term memory here, but that doesn't mean that they're going to help with glycogen deposition in an athlete or help you shuttle more of the carbohydrates you consume into glycogen stores rather than lipogenesis or fat, which is arguably not that big a deal anyway. But anyway, muscle contractions are probably the single biggest thing that you could focus on, which most of our listeners already do, as far as getting glucose where it should go, into muscle mass. But any quick thoughts, Mike? Cinnamon,
Yeah,
minerals?
there's some, like you said, there's some good data on that. A lot of the chromium data is in diabetics who may be missing that in their diet to begin with.
Or excreting it. Yeah, they excrete some of these, yeah.
Right, it's not being absorbed. So adding that to someone who has plenty of it already, probably not a huge effect. I haven't looked for a while, but a couple of years ago I looked at a lot of the common glucose disposal agents, and I was kind of unimpressed overall. And if you've looked at actual live glucose and insulin data, it's really messy. It's really pulsatile. It really depends on when you're capturing it, how often you're capturing it, and what population you're looking at. So maybe, like you said, I think, muscle movement is probably going to be the best. I've done a lot of work with looking at heart rate variability and have people just do glucose measurements, just get one of the precision extra kits that you can get over the counter. And what I found, which is anecdotal, is that sleep made a massive difference, and stress also made a massive difference.
Yeah.
So a lot of times in people that were, kind of borderline type 2 diabetic, their physician really didn't want them to do anything. Just once we got their sleep and their stress and their HRV scores a little bit better, their overall average of their resting glucose started to come down pretty nicely, actually. So.
Yeah. I think a lot of the micronutrients or herbal type things, that's like Band-Aid on a bullet wound in a lot of ways, because you've got these counter-regulatory hormones, adrenaline and cortisol and stuff are screaming. You're not going to have really good glucose tolerance in those kinds of settings, like you said, from poor sleep or overdoing the stimulants or what have you. Like I said, coffee is actually there's a lot of good data that coffee may help. Yeah. That's why I like coffee as the pre-workout stimulant of choice instead of just some really harsh, pill or powder.
Hydrous caffeine, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, we could probably revisit that again in the future. Some interesting stuff there. He says, lastly, I wanted to get my greedy paws on the testosterone boosting talk that you mentioned in the mid-show ad. Yeah, I'm happy to send that. And he just makes a comment here that's funny. I'm at the age where it's time to start looking hard at my diet and really eating to allow myself to keep up with my lifestyle. And then in caps, he says, I refuse to be one of those kyphotic, out-of-shape beanpole lawyers that you see all the time. And I greatly appreciate what you guys do, etc. So this is funny. He's a fun guy. So thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Neil.
Yeah, we may take a closer look at some of those things, but I'm a little jaded, and I think we probably all are. I'm not even going to ask Phil how interested he is in glucose disposal supplements, because he's going to be like,
you take those with
food.
Your donuts, right, Phil?
Yeah. That's my snack.
Okay, let's get to the last one, and this is a lengthy one from Neil number 2, and I don't mean to pigeonhole you guys, but it was so funny. I was sort of thanking these guys back and forth, and because they're supporting the show in different ways, and I started getting confused. I think which one am I replying to, right? So we'll just do this kind of quickly. I'll pick just one or two questions he has. IronRadio brothers. Finally, I became a supporting member after many years of listening. I can't give enough compliments to you guys for the work that you do and what you've done for me and my lifting game. And I appreciate the listener mail, so I thought I would have a few questions for it, basically, for you to discuss. Do you feel, here's the first one, do you feel that there is a superior red meat to consume? I'm an avid hunter, and I always have a healthy supply of elk, moose, deer, and bear. Wow. For consumption. I rarely eat beef anymore due to the cost and the sourcing of good product. Plus, why would I when I have a huge supply of lean red meats at my disposal? From what I have found or read, it seems to me that elk and buffalo seem to be the most potent red meats. However, bear does offer some interesting benefits due to its fat and iron content. What are your thoughts? I know I'm a nutritionist, Neil, but I haven't really read a ton of things, some on buffalo, but not really bear. I mean, not many people, I don't think I've ran into anyone, actually, who regularly eats bear. Obviously, I'm going to think, at least, and again, this is just speculation, but I got to think that they're going to be fairly rich in some of the usual terrestrial meat, characteristics. Heme iron, which is like 30 or 40% absorbable instead of like plant iron, which is usually like 6 or 8% absorbed. Creatine, carnosine, right, which is a precursor for, carnosine, which can be absorbed. Some of it gets destroyed by an enzyme, carnosinase, but is a muscle acidity buffer, things like that. A lot of people take beta-alanine to try to increase their carnosine, but you can, in fact, increase carnosine. It's not completely useless just to get it from meats. B12, there's a lot of good things in terrestrial meats in general. I don't know. I don't want to pigeonhole you, Dr. Nelson, but you're from Minnesota. The first time I went up there to teach, when I was teaching at Winona, Kelly's like, "Oh, look," and we saw 2 cars. They have like deers bobbing off their front bumpers. Like hunters coming back. Do you know anything about some of these unusual meats? Elk, deer, bear?
Not that much. I mean, I looked into it a while ago. We were in Alaska. My uncle lives up there, so we did a lot of halibut fishing several years ago, and he eats mostly moose and other things. He said bear once in a while. I guess the bears, if you get them after they've been just gorging themselves on blueberries, I guess the meat looks kind of much darker and tastes like completely different, I guess.
Interesting.
Probably consumption of everything that's in blueberries, anthracynides, that kind of stuff.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in general, when I looked at it, like especially elk, I mean, it's good. It's very lean. My wife is from Montana, so I've been out there several times and had elk. Last time I was in Colorado, friends I was visiting, they used to live in Alaska, so they made me the caribou that night. Yeah, caribou and salmon. That was pretty good. Yeah, I mean, I think that's good. I mean, I just did a quick literature scan. The only sort of quote-unquote negative thing I could find, just like any other types of meat, is, where you get it from is going to matter, especially what's actually in it. There's one here, 2014, from Noel, talks about grizzly bear hair reveals toxic exposure to mercury through salmon consumption. So obviously, if they're in an area where the salmon got contaminated for whatever reason, then the bears eat all the salmon. It's going to show up in the bear meat also. But you can say that for any type of food source. It's not particularly different there.
Especially like apex predators, right? This is probably like with swordfish and big fish like that, right? The accumulation, yeah. But there's some stuff that the fatty acid profile may be a little bit better. That gets into even like grass-fed cows versus conventional. But it's not a massive difference. If you're taking fish oil, probably evens it out. But I mean, I think in a perfect world, the more variety people can get from a good, clean source, I think that's going to be to their benefit. Sounds good. Phil, do you have a freezer full of any kind of interesting meats, deer or buffalo, elk, anything like that?
No, I mean, the only thing I was going to say, if anything, is just going to be super lean, so you may have to supplement some fat a bit.
Yeah, it's very lean.
Yeah, I just got some deer from a friend. And it's so lean, it's just straight dry. But
deer's very dry.
Yeah,
we turn a lot of it into sausage, and you add fat to it. So
right on. Yeah. You know what? That's a really good question, Neil. And I am going to look. Now I'm curious, right?
Yeah,
because I'm a big carnivore. Yeah, for sure.
Didn't you have an article on that for T-Nation way back in the day, Lonnie, about the zoo chemicals you can find in meats?
Yeah, I think that might be the one. It's been years now, but I think T.C. Luoma, the editor there, right, of course, he renamed it Die Vegan Die or something like that. And I'm like, okay, you guys are coloring this too much. That's not what I said. It's like that spot reduction article. I was speculating about microdialysis, and how local blood flow changes thing, and and it just things just sort of get colored sometimes. All right, whatever.
Yeah.
Get some controversy. I think I'm going to hold some of these other ones because Neil, you've got some other cool questions here, and some are about lifting, some are about nutrition. So we're going to table some of these till next week. because I want to ask you guys quickly as we move into the topic of the day, even before the topic of the day. I wanted to ask about your 1 or 2 tips about breaking into fitness and nutrition media. You could focus mostly on writing if you want. That's sort of the topic today. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves into podcasting or YouTube and other things, but I guess anything's up for grabs. So, Phil, you work behind the scenes and in front of the camera, so to speak, for years. If you had 1 or 2 tips for somebody who was interested in getting into blogging, writing for a paper mag, a web mag, anything like that, any tips?
The first one would be do it a lot. The best thing I ever did for my writing was I got a position where I had to write an article a week. So I got much better at it.
Yeah, practice.
When you do it a lot, oddly enough, you get better at it. So, I would just start writing a ton and put it out there for people to see, even if it's on your own blog. I was in a place where I had to do it for somebody else. So it was for sure going to be seen. But you can reach out to your local, nowadays, your newspaper and stuff like that. They're always looking for content for their online stuff. And you won't get anything out of it. But it's going to get out there in people's faces, and you're going to get feedback. So that'd be number 1.
That's good. Practice.
Yeah.
If anything, lifting will teach you is you don't just lay down and start benching 405. You got to practice. So, what about you, Dr. Nelson? You still write, you still send stuff, I know, and you send inquiries and stuff to like the editors at T Nation, like, hey, do you guys want this? Do you want that? Or you'll participate in roundtables. What's a gold nugget you might have for somebody who wanted to get into fitness or like sports nutrition writing?
Yeah, I agree with Phil. Like the biggest thing, we were talking about this at the conference here last night again, is that just go write and put it out there. Now it's easier than ever. You don't even need a website. You could just start putting it on Facebook if you want. You don't need another platform or anything else. I think if I look at anyone in, fitness, especially people who do some online work in fitness that have been around for 5 or 10 years, and I can't think of an exception where they didn't put out a pretty massive amount of content, and the stuff you put out at first is, some of the early articles I wrote, I'm like, God, this is so horrible.
It's hard to read.
Like when I transferred some, sites in between stuff. Like from Blogger to the other site, I've had 3 sites. This is my 5th site. In the process, I've probably dumped 80% of the stuff that I wrote just because I didn't want to republish it. I didn't like it anymore. And a lot of stuff I write now is through my newsletter. So a lot of it doesn't even show up in public, which is fine and kind of done on purpose. But I think just practice, get better. No one's that good when they start. Even now I write stuff and I'm like, no, that was okay. Other stuff, I'm like, God, this is horrible. And that's what's interesting is you talk to other people who are professional writers, like our friend Lou Schuler, who's, written tons of books and, is a journalist. And even for him, he's like, yeah, I have days where it's, it's much harder to write than other days, and this is a guy who's done it for decades, so just like lifting, right? Some days are just going to be harder than others. Some days are going to be better. And that's just kind of the process. Probably the single best advice I ever got was from TC at TMAG. So years ago, Phil will remember this, like at the Test Fest conference. I was there and TC was there, and this is like back, God, when was that? Probably 12 years ago, maybe. And so I go up to him and I say, oh, hey, TC, I'm Mike Nelson. I said, I know everyone's going to ask you this question, but I have to ask it anyway. And I said, how do I get to be a writer for T Nation? And he asked me, he goes, what do you do? I said, I just started my own, business. I'm thinking about going back to, to school. And he looks at me and he goes, you give it, 2 to maybe 6 years and do something useful and then get back to me.
So experience.
And at the time, I was like horrified. I'm like, oh, he's such a big meanie,
Right.
And then I realized I'm like, oh, well, he's actually right, from the outside looking in at that point. Like, why would anyone publish, especially on that site, anything that I've done to this point?
Yep.
So,
yep.
In fact, 6 years, and then I sent him an email. I think I might have got his name from you and said, "You may not remember this, but remember the advice you told me." And then, here's what I did in the past 5 years. And yeah, they published the article on metabolic flexibility in 2011.
Yeah. So I did what you actually suggested. That's like tough love, right? Yeah, it hurts, but an editor, you rather have him be honest than like, oh, honey, totally. You're fine. Let's, yeah, they need content and they need good content, and in fact, the after the break here, Dr. Cordaro, she's actually talking about similar things. So yeah, good stuff. Okay, we're gonna wrap it up there and go to break, and then when we come back, we'll have that special interview, and we'll see everyone next week.
Yep. See you later.
Yeah.
Hey listeners, this is Dr. Lonnie Lowry. If you've ever had anyone critique you on your protein intake as part of your weightlifting lifestyle, oh, you poor meathead, all that extra protein is going to rot your kidneys or weaken your bones or dehydrate you or give you gout or who knows what. There is a book available. You could simply Google CRC Press and Lowry. And what I've done is reach out to experts all over the world and create a book, a single compendium that you can hold up and say, this is why I consume extra protein. This can be very valuable when you're being quote-unquote educated by various professionals on the topic. There's an enormous amount of literature in this book on the safety, the effectiveness, how protein works in cells, the history of protein and weight trainers, much more. So again, please check out CRC Press and Protein and Lowry. You can just Google that, and I do, full disclosure, I do make a small single-digit royalty on the book, but that's not why I did it. I did it so we can all have something, our particular population, to both defend what we do and to inform our nutrition and our eating. Thanks.
I can't stop feeling. Some of us don't understand how lucky we are to be living in this.
Hi, listeners. This is Rob Fortress Sportney. I'm here to remind you that as the holiday season approaches and your thoughts turn to giving, we like you to keep IronRadio in your thoughts.
Over the past several years, there have been hundreds of listener comments hoping that IronRadio stays on the air for years to come. IronRadio is here for you. But as with any public radio type format, the show is listener supported. That's where you come in. For just $4 a month, you become a supporting member, keeping your weekly dose of education, experts, and gym talk flowing. Just go to www.ironradio.org and click on the $4 monthly subscribe button near the bottom of the page.
Or click the donate button at the right of the page for a one-time donation. You are the Iron Brotherhood and Sisterhood.
Of course, not everyone can afford to be a supporting member or a significant one-time donor, but for those of you willing to pitch in, $4 per month or $50 just once, we're about to sweeten the deal. Become a supporting member or major donor between now and January, and a limited number of you will receive a gift worth over $20. And we will never forget our existing supporters. Simply email me via ironradio.org, and I'll send you a free seminar from Dr. Lowry on how to significantly and realistically boost your testosterone levels. Help your iron brothers and sisters who cannot pitch in but deserve better internet programming in our sports. And happy holidays.
Iron Radio is, of course, primarily a podcast. But over the years, there have been technical glitches calling for backup streaming and listeners who wanted the convenience of other sources of audio content. Toward this end, Iron Radio is now simulcast and backed up on YouTube. If needed, please search Lawnman07 or Iron Radio from within YouTube. There's not much video, but if you like to listen through YouTube on a Roku or other living room device, there you go.
Like your weekly fix of Iron Radio? In addition to being a popular institute on iTunes, we are also on email. Simply go to www.ironradio.org and sign up for the voluntary email. You'll get a once per week email, no more. That's little more than the show notes and a link to the audio. So go for it.
All right, welcome back, everybody. So we are with Danielle Cordaro. And we're going to talk about getting into fitness writing or nutrition writing. A lot of our listeners are interested in that sort of thing. I put myself through grad school doing some of that stuff. But there's a lot of things to consider. So we're going to start off talking really about the craft of writing. So who better to go to than someone who's an English professor? And so the first thing I think we should probably cover are some definitions. So what are the elements of writing? What are some of the definitions to get the stage set?
Yeah. Okay, so some of the things that your listener should be thinking about is, the craft of writing, which is really about telling stories. So you need to be thinking about, who are the characters in your story, even if you're writing about something like coffee or peanuts or, nutrition, so it seems like there's no characters there, but really the food is kind of like, part of the story. So it's like, how are you going to describe those things so that they come alive and are vivid for readers? If you're talking about researchers, you're going to be, people who are doing research on something. You want to not just have flat characters. You want to make sure that your audience understands like who you're writing about and can envision those things. They can see them. So that's a big element of the craft of writing, is actually getting into helping your audience be able to see with their inner eye what it is that you are describing. So a lot of times, like in my classes, my creative writing classes, I am always trying to stress to students the necessity of creating an image in the reader's mind. And you might think, oh, that's for poetry, but it's for all writing. Okay, all engaging writing, gives the person reading it a sense of what's happening. And we are primarily visual creatures. So images is like sort of the first thing that we start with, but then you can add things in like sound. What does it sound like? And that requires you to do some research beyond just what is the science here. So it's a good idea, and we'll talk about this maybe a little bit later. If you're researching a subject, get really familiar with it. Like if you're going to talk about food, eat it. Go and eat it and see what it tastes like, and write notes about what does it taste like to you. Is it pasty? Is it chalky? Is it is it something that is appetizing? How is it appetizing? That's what I mean by making a character out of sort of the things that you are writing about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Chris Shugart, who I mentioned sometimes, he's the editor at testosterone.com, and early on when I would write stuff, he would say things like, Lowry, tell a story, right, instead of just lecture.
Right.
So his whole thing that I remember after all these years was tell a story and offer some actionable gold nuggets like at the end, right? Because in fitness and nutrition, it's hard to do that, right? Because we like to do assessments on people, and we don't want anybody to try something stupid and this and that. So it's actually a challenge to come up with some of these gold nuggets. Like, so consider this, consider that, based on the literature or based on this, but all in the context of a story. Because like you said, without the story, it's a boring-ass lecture and nobody wants to listen to it.
Right. So that's another element of the craft of writing, is telling a story. So all good stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? And so you're not going to start with Once Upon a Time, but make sure that you're abiding by the old-new contract. It's what we call in technical writing. So old information comes first for the reader. That is something that you can forget about when you are kind of immersed in a subject and it all just sort of seems equally important to you or equally on the same level. Think about creating a narrative for the person who's reading it and maybe has no background on what it is that you're talking about. So start with old information first before you introduce new information, and you have to be able to think about an ideal reader when you're thinking about what's old for them. Does that make sense? Like, so who is the person that you picture when you picture someone reading this piece?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep. Okay, no, that does make sense. All right, so let me get to the next question here. if we have someone who's never published anything before and they're thinking about, I don't want to get too much into all different types of media and that sort of thing, but they haven't published anything before. They want to get started, essentially, and talking writing about sports nutrition or fitness or whatever. Do you have any tips for them to get started?
Yes. Okay, so let's say that you're a writer and you are a big fan of a certain magazine, you want to write for them. That's great. That's a good start. So become a fan or start reading particular publications that you are interested in being published in. First of all, it kind of gives you just like a sense of what are the types of things that this magazine publishes. And it also gives you a sense of how long are certain things that are in the magazine. So there might be features that are much, much longer. There might be shorter things that may be a good start for you, like reviews, for example. When I started writing in my field, even though I'm a writing person, I started with writing reviews of books that had just come out in the field because those were short, and I could sort of cut my teeth on that. It was like not the editor. The editor wasn't always on my butt trying to get, every single little thing, dialed out. It's also kind of considered to be like a really good service thing to do for the field. So book reviews are great, or, reviews of anything, really. Products, things like that are great ways to get started because they tend to be shorter. Then when you sort of get a little bit more confidence, you can move on up. You can also, one of the best things to do if you're hoping to get published in a particular journal or magazine or whatever, contact the editor and say, hey, I am looking to start. I would like to publish something. Here's some of my ideas. That's actually called a query. And there's if you want to get online and see what a query should look like, there are lots of sources. I believe the Purdue Owl has some business writing stuff that might be helpful to your listeners on that. But yeah, I mean, the secret is to read a lot in places where you want to be published, and that will help you sort of get you won't have to know anything specifically. You'll just kind of absorb it.
Right.
What that magazine tends to publish.
Yeah, that echoes a lot, and I think listeners have heard us talk for years about, if you want to compete and you want to enter a certain competition, go the year before, look at the field, hey, I think I can take those guys, right. Or, oh my gosh, that's out of my league. It's sort of like that, know what's there first before you jump in the deep end.
Yeah, exactly, right. And it's actually not as hard as you think. Also, read the masthead. I mean, that tells you exactly what that journal or magazine is interested in. And that usually can be found, on the first page or two if there is one. But some of them don't have a masthead, and you have to call or email or something, and kind of email is usually the best way.
So you mentioned reviews. So let's say we have some listeners, they want to start writing reviews. You could probably do reviews just of protein powders or dietary supplements or something. So if they want to do something like that, in your opinion, that actually submit it somewhere, not just blog it themselves or something. That's a lower barrier to entry, maybe, reviews?
I don't know much, unfortunately, about this specific world, but in publishing in general, especially if you're talking about magazines, it tends to be easier to get in with something shorter, and that is and something current. So if something is breaking, it just came out, those are things that tend to be more highly valued than reviewing something that's been out for a few years, unless you have sort of an angle where it's I'm going to look at how, this older thing sort of matches up with this newer thing. And that's not really a review. That's more that could be a feature where you're looking at, comparing two products or comparing 3 products or whatever. So, but a review of a single thing, whether it's a book on nutrition, whether it's a specific product, those are things that that should be fairly low bar by comparison with other things, because the magazine needs those things. Those are things that their readers go immediately and look at that and say, is that going to be worth my time? So it's really good. I think people really appreciate it. It's not going to make you famous right away.
Yeah.
But it will definitely get you in the door at the magazine, which is what you want. You want to start building basically a portfolio of things that you've written, so that you can go and say, hey, maybe the third time you're trying to write something, you can say to the person, that you can say to the editor, hey, I've written these 3 things already, check them out or link to them or whatever, and that helps you become more credible as a writer.
Right. No. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we have some of our listeners they're highly educated guys, and they could walk in on fairly, advanced topics if they wanted to do that kind of stuff, like value add to what they're doing. But I can see what you're saying, like if something's timely and it's breaking news or something like that, or even like on the review front. I like what you said about immersing yourself in it first. Like, if you're going to review a protein powder, don't just look at the label and say, oh, look, they're nitrogen spiking, that protein grams, that's artificially inflated because they put a bunch of junk in here that's not good protein. But actually go taste it, go try it, buy it yourself. In the fitness world, you could do that with training programs. I like what you said about books. Mm-hmm. I mean, for all of the critique that dietary supplements get as sort of a scam, and oftentimes many of them are, there are, of course, legitimate ones, and our listeners are pretty familiar with which ones are, but books are another potential scam market. So, I mean, reviewing books could be very valuable, or a training program, like if you join a particular system of one type or another. I mean, like CrossFit is so big now, you could talk about your experience in a CrossFit box somewhere, or you visited somewhere. I like the review stuff, especially of existing, like books and stuff like that, or products. Yeah,
books is great because it gives you a ton of stuff to talk about.
Okay, last up, so in a Web 2.0 world, it seems like everyone publishes, and we've bellyached on the podcast before, longtime listeners know this, about how editors used to be gatekeepers, right? And you didn't see a bunch of junk. And I'm really down on YouTube lately. There's a lot of stuff, some guy or gal wins the genetic lottery and says, look at me, so do what I do, and we always try to fault that stuff. But in any case, so we live in this self-publishing kind of thing, whether it's YouTube or podcast or blogs or whatever, and we don't have, in some ways I like the idea of the freedom that people can, talk about their own experiences and that sort of thing, but in fitness and nutrition, it's like everyone is an expert, and so we've lost that gatekeeper role of the editors and that kind of thing. But so if someone does want to start providing content for people to consume, to read, what can they do to sort of ensure quality? Or, if they're just starting out, they might think, I'm not sure I know quite enough. I'm not a doctor of this or that. Should I be writing about something? What can they do to produce good stuff?
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about blogging for a second, because I think that's how a lot of people think, I'm going to quickly get something out there, and and it's not wrong. Like, say, if you link to your blog, you're wanting to get published in a magazine, you're wanting to maybe publish a book with a publisher, having a really good blog is a great way to sort of show off what you can do. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to do, but you're right, it is sort of the Wild West in the sense that, like, nobody is going to come, your English teacher from 10th grade is not going to come knocking on your door saying, why is this modifier dangling? So you have to, you have to take some of that onto yourself, or, you have to take responsibility for having it done. And a lot of people don't do that, but there are people available that you can hire who will proofread your work. There's different levels of editing. I mean, it probably for blogging, because you want to get it out there fast, you want to learn how to do a lot of this stuff yourself. So it might be a good idea if you're worried about like your style, and you want to make sure that you are writing well, like that's one of your concerns. Take a writing class. Go to a community college if you're not in school, and take a writing class.
It's interesting that when I talk about quality, your default is sentence structure or something like that, and mine's always content, right? Like I think about, like, is the physiology right? Are they explaining that wrong? So it's funny to see the sort of different biases, right? And they're both true, right? If the English is poor, nobody can read that for very long, and if the physiology is poor, the nutrition is bad advice, people are going to tune you out for that too. Yeah.
I mean, both things are good to do. Realize that you're working in a medium. Right, and if what you're talking about is writing, that's the medium. So you're gonna want to know something about why what works in the world of writing before you take on a huge writing project like a blog. That's enormous. If you're blogging, you should be updating your blog, on a regular schedule. It doesn't have to be weekly. I think people think they need to write a blog every week. That's a lot. I mean, that would be a lot for someone who likes writing and, is not threatened by it.
So that's an interesting point, because that's one of the reasons we started Iron Radio like 9 years ago. Was I was writing for magazines, and I got to the point where I could crank something out within an afternoon, but we can do Iron Radio with almost no prep. We've been very transparent with everybody about this, right? So it is every week. So when Phil and I were like, listen, number one rule, never miss a week, right? So I understand that you're saying you don't have to do it like that, but at least then people know it's coming on a regular basis. There's a couple of web comics that I actually stole the idea from, where people said, you just do a web comic. What set you apart? Because these guys blew up, and now they do events, and they do all this stuff and revenue generating stuff. And they said, well, consistency. We wanted to do this every single week, no matter what. And that's why we haven't missed a week in 9 years.
Yeah, it's really important to be regular. Even if like you update twice a month or something, that's fine. Just make sure that you're doing it on a fairly regular schedule, because you're trying to connect with an audience. But back to your point about like, what do you do without an editor, right? I mean, I thought of the writing side, but if you're talking about like the research side and making sure that like, you're using good sources, that has to do with doing your own research well. And I think part of the problem with, this is something we talk about, we're both professors, we talk about this with our students all the time, that they want to rely on like this blog, another blog that they read as like evidence or as actual real research. You can't. That's just the truth. Like, if you want to be taken seriously in this world, you should be using credible, good sources, and it's on you as the writer, because you don't have an editor and you don't have a fact checker behind you, to be responsible for that. And one way to sort of get good at that, because it's kind of a skill that you have to develop, is get really critical about the things that you read. Okay? So like your favorite blog, your favorite magazine, look at how sources are being documented and ask yourself if you think that that's good evidence. I know that if you're bothering to do a blog, those should be questions that you're asking. Does that make sense? And if you're starting with review articles like we talked about, if you're looking to get into print magazines or even online magazines that do have editors and do have a reputation and yada yada, that it might be better almost to start with publishing with a publisher for a couple times, because you will get thoroughly edited. You will start to see some of the things that you do that maybe you would want to take care of before you start your own self-publishing venture.
Yeah, a lot of what you're saying is, and listeners that have been around since the beginning, they remember Fortress. Rob, he was the managing editor at the magazines where I was the science editor. So he would ride me like, Lonnie, I need this by midnight at the very latest. It's got to go, into the layout. And he would, so timing-wise, but also some of the other stuff, like he would tear apart my, sentence structure. It was his role in a lot of this kind of, in a sense, I felt spoiled, because I had like an inside line to a lot of what you're saying. Like when you get someone to look at your stuff, and whether it's meeting a consistent deadline or just the quality of it in general, practice actually with a published, sending stuff to an editor a few times.
Yeah.
And I had that through Rob all the time. And I'll tell you, he was a harsh master with that stuff, and it's hard. And you know what too? I've always found it's hard to edit yourself. Mm-hmm. Like if I do straight up science writing and I have something that's 600 words, it has to be under 300 words, like as an abstract to submit it or something. That's painful, right? So people, when you reduce your stuff down, that can be very hard.
Yeah, that's a good exercise to do. You probably remember this from school. Start with a first draft and write a lot, and then go back and try to cut it. And it's a good exercise. Like, so if you wrote 1,000 words on something just to get a draft out, try to get that down to 500 words and see where you are. If you're interested in learning like some good techniques for doing that, one of the really helpful, I mentioned it before, one of the really helpful online resources is the Purdue OWL. I know that scientists are kind of like stuck in the passive voice, for example. And if you don't know what the passive voice is, it is basically when you take an active verb and you you add a form of is before it, and then past participle, past tense of a word next to it. So, the lamp was broken. Okay, by who, right? And that you'd be amazed at how much longer and more convoluted sentences like that make your writing. There's actually something called the paramedic method. It's explained on the Purdue Owl. Just Google owl. It comes up before the bird, which kind of shows you, if you look on Google, that this is a source that is used by a lot of people. It's a really great writing resource. If you're struggling with, you're writing something for maybe not a magazine but a journal, and you've never used a particular style like APA or MLA, or you won't be using MLA, but maybe Chicago style potentially. It has got tons of resources on there for that. Tons of grammar resources. So don't be a dummy, basically. Go and educate yourself and recognize that, writing is not just this invisible thing. Just because you know how to write words doesn't mean that you know everything, that you might need to know in order to be an effective writer.
No, yeah, that makes sense a lot. And you know what, too? Because we're going to tackle this across maybe a couple of episodes, not too many. I know some people are like, hey, back to the barbells, Lowry, and that's fine. But a lot of people do want to get into writing, or again, when we talk about Web 2.0 and immersing people in a story, I mean, we do audio for a reason, right? It's faster. We do it with almost no prep, and we can do things like occasionally you'll hear us layer in ambient sounds or a funny like a news bumper that we use or something like that, or a joke, something that's just sort of funny audio and stuff like that. So I like what you said about working within a medium, because writing is one, but audio and video are others, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Okay. Well, good stuff. All right, so that's going to be it for this week. And again, for people who are interested in fitness writing, nutrition writing, that sort of thing, I don't want to get into some of the gory science side of this, like, what constitutes good evidence. Like, there's a difference between professional opinion or certainly lay opinion and some type of controlled double-blind trial, that's cause and effect in nature and that sort of thing. So it does help, like you said, when you explore something yourself. Obviously, if you've got a bachelor's degree or you have a lot of experience, both these things are ways to educate yourself on a topic, right? So we've always championed formal education, but also years of experience. I mean, listeners know that Phil, he's been all over the world in an apprenticeship model with all kinds of people. I mean, he has a master's degree. A lot of people know that it's actually in fine art. It's not in strength conditioning, right? So he's sort of a Renaissance guy, but he's highly educated about his craft because of all the people that he's worked under. So in any case, I don't want to ramble on, but thanks for tuning in this week. We're going to follow up with Dr. Cordaro again in the future with some other things. If you want to break into the media world of one form or another when it comes to sharing information or stories about fitness and nutrition. See you later.
Hey listeners, have you seen the store at IronRadio.org? There are 3 halls in the store. One for Phil, one for Fortress, and one for myself, Dr. Lowry, and they're thematic. So you can go into our Halls of Iron store and choose based on your goal. If you need something to learn or read or something nutritional, you can look in my store, Lonnie's store. If you want something about injury prevention or competition, then take a look at Phil's Hall of Iron. And if you want something about motivation or daily training, Fortress's Hall has what you're looking for. There are some fun, heroic descriptors as you browse through the stores. We try to make it a little more fun than the average boring online store. And whether you're a novice lifter or someone more experienced, you can take heart that you're not wasting your time. The things that we put in each Hall of Iron are actually based on our own recommendations. Protein powders that we know to be good, knee sleeves, wraps of some kind, things that Fortress uses in his own training. The stuff you see, is good. This way you don't waste time. So check out the Iron Radio store at ironradio.org And let us know what you think on the forums, and certainly you can request products and we will screen them before they go in. So, thanks for listening. Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the IronRadio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.